It's been 1 year since Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te took office. We take a look at the accomplishments and challenges of his first 12 months. What has China's reaction been to the 1-year anniversary of Lai's presidency? A driver who crashed into a crowd in New Taipei has left at least 3 people dead, 2 of them children. Plus,
we just spent 2.5 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and I think some progress is.
Fresh from speaking to Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump says Russia and Ukraine will start ceasefire negotiations immediately, but the details are unclear. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Betty Chen. It's been 1 year since Taiwan President Lai Ching-te took office. On Tuesday, he took to the podium to lay out what he has in store for the next 3 years of his term. Leslie Liao was at the speech and brings us this report.
As the famous saying goes, it's all about the economy. President Lai Ching-te spent much of a speech on his 1-year anniversary in office talking about economic issues. He said that Taiwan needs to wean off its reliance on being an export-driven economy, but also expand into other markets. He added that he'll make Taiwan's interest the highest priority in ongoing trade talks between the U.S. and Taiwan, and that he'll establish a sovereign wealth fund. Lai also spoke on many domestic issues like climate change, healthcare, and social stability. He committed to the government's goal of making Taiwan a net zero carbon emitting country by 2050. And he added that he'll also invest around $33 billion in Taiwan's green energy sector by 2030. On healthcare, Lai said the government will continue to support programs like disease control and cancer treatment. Throughout his speech, Lai consistently called for unity and democracy, saying that Taiwan's democratic system was one of its most treasured qualities.
我相信没有任何一个台湾人会放弃民主自由的生活，也没有一位总统可以背离民主自由的价值。
One point that was notably missing from Lai's speech is China. Lai has made countering Chinese infiltration and strengthening Taiwan's defenses against threats from across the strait a priority in his first year in office. But his speech didn't really mention China, and he only said in a Q&A session after the speech that he'd be willing to talk to China, but only on equal footing. Now, Lai's 1 year in office comes as there are steep divides between Taiwan's ruling and opposition parties. One of the biggest recent sticking points is a $13.5 billion special budget that the ruling Democratic Progressive Party's cabinet wants to pass. But Taiwan's opposition, which holds the legislature, has slapped down the ruling party's special budget amid concerns about the country's energy policy. And that's why Lai mentioned his commitment to green energy in his speech today to reiterate his support for the current course. But he also told opposition lawmakers and opposition leaders that he's willing to talk.
我将指示国安团队着手规划，向在野党主席进行重要国安情势简报，期望朝野政党领袖，无论政治立场为何，我们都能够以国家利益为优先。
Taiwan's opposition has responded, saying it's willing to consider Lai's proposal while also questioning its timing.
他所提出来要坦率真诚交换意见，共商国事，到就职1周年才抛出，其实已经拖延了许久。
Eric Zhu, the leader of the main opposition Kuomintang, says that the challenges that Taiwan faces can't be solved in a day, but he hopes that this is the beginning of new substantial exchanges and a chance to bury the hatchet. Justin Wu, Joseph Wu, and Leslie Liao for TaiwanPlus.
Beijing has long taken issue with President Lai, labeling him a dangerous separatist just days before his inauguration last May. And relations between the two countries haven't improved much since then. Reese airs us live in our Taipei newsroom with more on this fraught relationship. Reese, what's China saying now on the 1 year anniversary of Lai's presidency?
Well, actually, nothing. No official diplomatic response from Beijing just yet. Their Foreign Affairs Ministry held a press conference this afternoon, and there was no mention of Taiwan there at all. That press conference came just hours after President Lai Ching-te held his press conference here in Taipei on the one-year anniversary of his inauguration. He too didn't directly mention China initially until he was prompted by a reporter, and here's what he had to say.
我在这里再次重申，只要对等尊严，台湾很乐意跟中国进行交流合作，透过交流来取代围堵，透过对话来取代对抗，朝和平共荣的方向来发展。
Now, some pretty unprovocative comments there from the president. In terms of other responses from China, there hasn't been much of a military response yet either, other than the kind of day-to-day incursions that we've come to expect here in Taiwan. Despite no official response, we have had some comments from people, Chinese citizens on the ground in Shanghai who were apparently paying close attention to President Lai Ching-te's speech. And here's what one man had to say.
我注意到他采访当中有说到说什么加强台湾的国防力量，然后去跟大陆去做一个尊严上面去平等的一个。其实，我觉得这跟我们大陆一直去主张的一个中国原则其实是有一点相违背的。那我觉得，可以能在这个方面再做一些协商跟沟通吧。
Now, despite the muted response from Beijing, officials here in Taiwan say that they are still on high alert. They're possibly anticipating some military action from China around Taiwan in the coming days. China has a habit of flexing their military muscles during moments like these. For example, last year, just 3 days after President Lai's inauguration on May 20th, China started the Joint Sword A military drills around Taiwan. It was some of the biggest such drills that we've ever seen and simulated actually a full blockade of the country.
Speaking of military action, in the 12 months since President Lai was sworn in, we've seen a lot of military flexing from China. What kinds of actions have we seen China take since May last year?
Yeah, well, we've seen a lot of incursions into Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. That's not Taiwan's official airspace, but they do use it as kind of a buffer zone against China. There was a dramatic increase in the number of incursions from 2023 to 24, almost doubling in those years. Remember, Lai, he started campaigning for the presidency in late 2023. He won the election in January of 24 and was then inaugurated in May of 24. And that brings us now to May of 2025. And going by the number of incursions so far this year, it looks like we're on track for another increase in terms of year-on-year incursions. And that's not to mention maritime incursions, which has been a hot topic recently here in Taiwan, especially after a lot of illegal smaller boat crossings from China to Taiwan. There were 2 just last week and another one just this morning. And Taiwan's Coast Guard fear that those could be China's ongoing grey zone warfare tactics. Those are attempts by Beijing to kind of slowly chip away at Taiwan's sovereignty and defense capabilities by means other than, starting a direct conflict. Other examples of grey zone warfare tactics include recruiting spies here in Taiwan, of which there have been a couple of high-profile cases recently, particularly involving military officials. It also includes, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and attempts by Beijing to get people outside of China on their agenda of eventually unifying Taiwan with China. And with China having a tendency to react with military might around these politically sensitive times, there are hopes here in Taiwan that the lack of diplomatic response isn't just the calm before the storm.
Thanks, Reese. That was Reese Ayers reporting from our Taipei newsroom. President Lai's first year in office has been marked by political infighting, growing threats from China, and complex relationships with world leaders like the new U.S. president. Tiffany Wong takes a look at some of the defining moments of Lai's first year.
A historic win. On January 13, 2024, Taiwan chose Democratic Progressive Party candidate Lai Ching-te to lead the country for the next 4 years as its 5th directly elected president.
在未来任期的每一天，我将行公义、好怜悯、存谦卑的心，视民如亲，不愧于每一份信赖与托付。新政府也将兢兢业业，拿出最好的表现，来接受全民的检验。我们的施政更要不断革新，开创台湾政治的新风貌。
Promising to protect democracy and improve the lives of the people, Lai won the support of 5.5 million people, 40% of voters, who hoped the new president and his party, the DPP, would lead Taiwan to a strong and stable future in their 3rd consecutive presidency, unprecedented in the democratic era. But election results elsewhere complicated things for the new president. The two main opposition parties, the Kuomintang and Taiwan People's Party, who also fielded candidates in the presidential election, won a combined majority in the legislature, meaning Taiwan would have a divided government for the first time in 20 years. A decisive split that would define Lai's first year in office. Days before Lai took office on May 20th, 2024, fighting had already broken out in the legislature over controversial amendments proposed by the opposition that would change the dynamics of power between lawmakers and the presidential office, spurring tens of thousands of protesters to gather outside the legislature. It marked the start of a year of growing partisan divides, spurring physical fights between lawmakers, protests, and more controversial legislation that's brought the highest court to a standstill and sparked countrywide calls for mass lawmaker removals. Lai's administration has also been plagued by increasing threats from China, including frequent incursions into the air and waters near Taiwan, and a record number of Chinese espionage cases within Taiwan's active and retired military ranks. In March this year, Lai called for stronger oversight in the military and called for a reintroduction of courts-martial, meaning stricter sentences for military officers who break the law.
过去这段时间，中国更利用民主台湾的自由与多元开放，吸收黑道、媒体、名嘴、政党，乃至于现退役军警，在我们的内部进行分化、破坏、颠覆等活动。
Since then, the government's cracked down on what it calls societal infiltration, including celebrities going to China and Chinese influencers living in Taiwan who create content seen as promoting unification by force. But Lai's administration has also tried to improve the quality of life and morale among soldiers, such as by raising military allowances. It's also urged the public not to stigmatize Chinese people in Taiwan just because of a few extreme cases. Another shakeup in Lai's first term, a new U.S. president. In facing a second Donald Trump presidency, Lai has stood firm in asserting Taiwan's value to the U.S., trying to find even footing, even as Taiwan seeks Washington's support.
无论在全球供应链体系间，或是区域安全的角色上，台湾都是全球和区域不可或缺的一员。我们是棋手，不会是棋子。
Taiwan's key bargaining chip, its semiconductor industry. But even as its biggest companies sign investment deals with the U.S., the country has still been hit with heavy tariffs of 32% by Trump, although the final number is still up for negotiation. Now, Lai is looking to prove Taiwan can stand up for itself in tariff negotiations with the U.S. and in ramping up defenses against China, while also proving his strength as a leader and breaking the current domestic political impasse. Tall orders that many in Taiwan are concerned about.
最大挑战是说两岸要搞好哦，不要因为自己一时之快讲一些话去刺激对方，哦，挑起了战争，对大家都不好。希望他呢尽量把头脑用在经济方面，不要去搞这些政治什么大罢免啊，什么一些政治这些，我觉得不必要。
你可以看到在网络上大家都是 不认同对方的意见也就算了，但是会开始任意的去批评啊，会去批斗啊。那我觉得这样的情况，对于他未来要执政3年那么长的一段时间来看，后面会不会产生一些更激烈的可能，我都会觉得是一个比较不好的状况。所以我还是希望他可以多少要负起说去平息百姓的这种群起激愤的这种心态的一个责任吧。对，
我觉得我们最近好像在谈会探讨到关税啊，然后一些年轻人外来的出入啊，对，所以会希望也许他可以给更多，就是创造更多年轻伙伴的空间，然后让大家可以在各个不同的面向内都能够成长。
As Lai's first year in office comes to a close, he faces a mounting list of challenges, shouldering the hopes and futures of the 23 million people in Taiwan for the next 3 years. Kama Shi and Tiffany Wong in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
For more on how Lai handled domestic and international hurdles in his first year as president, Alec McDonald spoke to Karis Templeton, research fellow at Hoover Institution.
So to start off with, what has been the main features of Lai's first year as president?
Well, I think the most striking feature of Lai's first year as president has been the just constant partisan fighting between the executive branch and the legislature. I've been a bit surprised at how deep and broad the animosity is between the ruling party, DPP, and the opposition, TPP and KMT. I didn't expect it to get this bad this quickly.
So do you believe that this partisanship is a defining challenge of Lai's first year as president?
I think it was an obvious challenge for him from election night on, when the results were known. I mean, he only won 40% of the vote, even though he won the election, and so he was a minority president from day one. And on top of that, his party, the DPP, lost their majority in the legislature, and so it was obvious to everyone that he needed some cooperation from the opposition parties to be able to get anything through the legislature. So I was a bit surprised and a little bit disappointed, frankly, that he did not seem to reach out to the opposition effectively in that window between the election and the seating of the legislature. And he really has tried as much as possible, seemingly, to ignore the opposition in the legislature. And I think that is a major source of the kind of problems he's had over the last year.
So as we have been discussing, Lai Ching-te's first year has not been without controversy or plenty of challenges. But what do you think some of his real successes have been?
Well, I think I noted he had a fair amount of continuity with his predecessor Tsai Ing-wen's policies. In some cases, that's been a really good thing, I think. None more so than in U.S.-Taiwan relations. There was some considerable concern in Washington, D.C. when Lai was a candidate to be president that he would be more challenging to deal with than Tsai Ing-wen, that he would create a fair amount of uncertainty in the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. And I think, for the most part, he's alleviated some of those concerns. The real source of uncertainty now in the bilateral relationship is actually on the U.S. side with the new president, Donald Trump, and his kind of unpredictable approach to almost all kinds of foreign policies. So Lai, by contrast, actually looks like a stabilizing force in the relationship right now. And I think we ought to give him credit for doing the kind of hard work of alleviating worries about his approach and building up the relationship with American interlocutors. A related point is on defense and civil society resilience issues. Lai has kind of stayed the course that Tsai Ing-wen put in place. And if anything, he's really doubled down.
That was Karis Templeton, research fellow at Hoover Institution. You can watch the full interview on our news show, Zoom In, Zoom Out, on YouTube or TaiwanPlus.com. At least 3 people are dead after a car crashed into passerby at a busy new Taipei intersection. Police say this may be a case of negligent homicide, though they are yet to determine the cause of the crash. As John and Therese reports, the shock has reached all the way to the highest levels of government.
People on this roadside stare in disbelief as a car rushes past, swerves suddenly, and slams into a busy intersection. Dashcam footage shows the suddenness with which the car crashed into people from behind. People who were there describe a confusing scene. At least 3 people, 2 of them children, died in the crash here in New Taipei's Sanxia district. 12 more people are injured.
主攻医院收到6个重大外伤的 case， 那其中有2个进到医院的时候就已经欧卡了，在我们经过1个半小时的抢救，已经是宣布没办法救回来了。
Police are still trying to figure out what happened, and with the driver unconscious, that's not been easy. For now, they're investigating this as a possible case of negligent homicide. The known facts are that the driver was speeding and ran a red light, and he had no traces of alcohol in his blood. But there's still uncertainty. The same driver hit a mother walking with a stroller on the sidewalk in 2020. While that incident wasn't fatal, it's not clear if there's a connection with this crash. There's been speculation that the driver's age, 78, may have been a factor, and police aren't ruling it out. And they plan to do a psychological screening to see if mental illness might be involved. The crash has shaken the whole nation. In a speech marking the first anniversary of his inauguration, President Lai Ching-te didn't begin with any of his government's achievements, but with a promise of help to those who need it.
行政院在第一时间成立专案小组，我昨晚也前往探视伤者，后续中央相关部会和地方政府会携手合作，积极协助家属，并尽速厘清事故发生原因。
But as police gather evidence and those in government react, a stunned community is simply trying to process what happened.
当下来真的很严重，我不知道先救哪一个。怎么会发生这种事情？
Answering this last question, how this happened, will be a top priority for investigators in the coming days as they comb the crash site for evidence and, they hope, question the one person who might know. Howard Zhang and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
The United Nations is warning that the 9 trucks of aid allowed into Gaza on Monday are just a drop in the ocean compared to what's urgently needed. UN Aid Chief Tom Fletcher made a comment after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lifted an 11-week aid blockade after pressure from the U.S. Fletcher says far more help is needed to meet critical shortages of food, medicine, and other essentials. Meanwhile, Israeli forces expanded their ground offensive, vowing to take control of all of Gaza. The UK and EU have struck a wide-ranging deal on defense, trade, travel, and fishing rights. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer hailed the agreement as a new era for relations between the two sides.
Britain is back on the world stage, working with our partners, doing deals that will grow our economy, and putting more money in the pockets of working people.
The deal will see reduced checks on food exports to the EU and allow European fishers continued access to UK waters. It also establishes a new defense and security pact and will eventually allow British travelers to use e-gates at more European airports. Opposition politicians in the UK say the agreement will take the country backwards. The UK left the European Union in 2020 after a divisive referendum 4 years earlier. Several countries have voiced support for Taiwan's participation in the World Health Assembly, which began in Geneva on Monday.
To respond to health emergencies, we should draw upon the experience of regions that have achieved notable public health outcomes, such as Taiwan. No region should be left behind to prevent geographical vacuum that could undermine global efforts to contain the spread of disease.
Officials from Germany, France, and New Zealand also advocated for Taiwan's inclusion on the first day of the annual health meeting. This is the 9th year in a row that Taiwan has been excluded from the WHO due to opposition from China. Foxconn chair Yong Liu says a planned supercomputer in the southern city of Kaohsiung will eventually use 100 megawatts of power, more electricity than several of the country's power plants generate.
You know, the power, I don't want to use the word shortage in Taiwan. It's a very, very critical resource. So it takes us a couple of steps in order to build it up to 100 megawatts.
Liu says the first phase of the data center will use 20 megawatts, followed by 2 40-megawatt increases. The issue of power has been divisive in Taiwan, which recently decommissioned its last nuclear reactor. The supercomputer project is a collaboration between Foxconn, NVIDIA, TSMC, and the Taiwanese government and will use 10,000 NVIDIA AI chips. Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories on Taiwan and around the world. Finally, we take you to a small town in France that set a world record for the largest gathering of Smurfs. I'm Betty Chen. Take care and see you next time.
I'm Tiffany Wong in Kuala Lumpur, and you're watching Taiwan Plus.